Jackson is in the house. So without any further ado, please welcome to the stage our moderator, one of the coolest dudes on the ship, the Kiss Expo extraordinaire, Keith LaRue.
We have nothing planned tonight, just so you know. But I've been obviously very lucky working with Kiss and some great stuff. And one of the best things was meeting the producer of my favorite Kiss record, which is Creatures of the Night. And we ended up becoming good friends. And so what I thought we'd do today, rather than prepare for anything, is kind of what I get to do quite a bit with Michael.
Wing it.
Yeah, just talk to him about Creatures. So we did the panel last year, and he only got 1 or 2 questions. And I know that Creatures is, well, not because they only wanted to ask 1 or 2. We didn't have the time. So, this is really kind of the conversation I had with Michael on the phone the first time we really started talking, was just going through, picking his brain about Creatures of the Night. So we'll go through a few things, and then if anybody wants to ask questions, get a little bit more in depth. But we're going to kind of focus on Creatures of the Night. Well, actually, maybe we should start with Killers. How did you actually meet Kiss the first time? How did you get involved? Killers was obviously pre-Creatures of the Night.
Okay, so the story, as the story goes, there's no manual for the music business. And my connecting with Kiss became a coincidence that occurred. My attorney represented Diana Ross, and Diana Ross was represented by Kiss's business manager. They had just done The Elder, and The Elder had not performed very well. And so there was a lot of talk about they needed help with the songs. So I was brought up as somebody who could help them with the songs. And that's what created the introduction for me. And so then I had a lunch with Paul in Los Angeles and a breakfast with Gene in Los Angeles. And then they decided after that to fly me to New York, where we had a group meeting. So we had a group meeting, and Gene said, you should come over to my place tonight. I'll play you my songs for the album. I've got 42 songs. And I looked at him and I thought, Bruce Springsteen doesn't have 42 songs, but I'll be there. So I went over that night and I sat with a clipboard. We went through the 42 songs. And at the end of it, I said, here's the deal. You have 3 songs. And one song has a great verse, still needs a chorus. Another has a great chorus, needs a great verse. And the third song is actually pretty good. So if you want to do this with me, and it's really okay if you don't, you have to come to Los Angeles and let me put you with some co-writers. And we'll make an agreement that we don't go near a studio until we have the songs that we all agree on. Now, for some insane fucking reason, he decided that this was a good idea. And they came to Los Angeles and they let me farm them out to some different talented people who brought different kinds of a different sense of melody that would fit their style. There's no question, since my background was much more melodic, rock and roll, songwriters, bands, but not hard rock bands. When Paul and I had lunch, he looked at me and said, "You've never produced anyone like us before." I said, "You're absolutely right. There isn't anybody else like you." But they were a fish out of water for me, and I was a fish out of water for them. But there was something about that clicked, and that we had much to really offer each other in the relationship. So that's how we met, and that was really the beginning of what came before Killers and what came before Creatures. Was a serious period of trying to craft some songs that would really re-identify the band. Because after The Elder, there was a lot of confusion about the identity of the band. And Creatures was a determination to ensure that the message was going to get through. So that's the beginning.
And maybe you can't say it here, but you're leaving out a good part, a couple of good parts. So you're meeting with Gene that night. Are you keeping that?
To me, you want all the dirt.
I do. I'm doing it.
Okay, so when you're talking about the albums.
The album?
Yeah, his mind has really been deconstructed.
You know what, they are actually on my side with this. We're Kiss fans in this room, so.
Okay, so I went through the 42 songs. I'm like a barking dog. You're just getting me to bark now. So we went through the 42 songs. We had the conversation in his little closet studio. And I said, either this or that. It's okay, whatever you want to do. Gene suddenly changed the subject and picked up a photo album that had all the Polaroids of different women that he had been with on the road. Sometimes there'd be an 8x10 black and white of an older woman. I said, "Who's this?" And she said, "Well, that was this one's mother." And then he kept going, and I got so unnerved. I felt there were so many, I felt I was going to see somebody I knew. And at that point, I closed it up, and he said, "I've got another one," as he's reaching for it, of course, because he couldn't stop showing off. And I said, "No, that's really fine. That's it." So that's the other part of the story that Keith somehow managed to pry out of me.
There's actually one more, but...
Well,
I gotta tell this part.
Sure. I mean, I rejected.
Michael said.
I rejected 39 songs.
He goes. I told him I was going to a Vault event to help out, and he goes, "Oh, well, you're talking to someone on the phone who rejected 38 of the tracks that are on that Vault now."
Now, in Gene's defense, which is a big job, but in Gene's defense, Gene's very prolific. I mean, he honestly is a very prolific guy, and he writes, or at the time, he wrote all the time. So those 30, let's be clear, those 38 or 39 songs may not be in the vault. Because he probably wrote another 400 songs between then and now. And what's in the vault, I really don't know. I haven't gone through it. So there
Okay,
you go.
so obviously you start working with them. They're in a turmoil with Ace, obviously being very little involvement on Creatures. What happened, where do you go from there? You go to the studio with what guitarist, who's coming in, who starts the whole project?
Since the band had become somewhat deconstructed, it was a matter of really finding some players that could really make a serious contribution and would feed into the identity that Kiss already had and continue it further. And but the main thing was the writing. The main thing was to finding the songs that would create a new signature for the band that was in keeping with who they are and who they started out being. Gene and Paul were always very clear on what Kiss is about. And at times we tried different things that may not have worked out, but eventually we landed on the right thing. But it was a process. Fluid, dynamic, crazy process, but exciting, because there was a mission involved, and the mission was to make a restatement of who the band was, so there would be no confusion for the fans whatsoever.
So on the songwriting side, so did you literally, were you involved in the whole process where you actually said, like you did with Gene, where this is good where it's at now, or it's...
Sure,
yeah,
that's part of the job. And the writers, some of the co-writers that I brought in were very accomplished guys and really made a serious contribution. And so when I was presented with the result of that, it was generally a completed quality song. Whether it was a right song for the band at the time was something to be determined. But did I make suggestions or some minor changes or whatever in the song? Sure, that's all part of the job.
You brought Bryan Adams in?
I brought Bryan Adams in, and Adam Mitchell, who also did Crazy Nights. Gene brought in Michael Japp. But Bryan Adams and Jim Valance, they did War Machine with Gene, which I just really came out great. I'm very proud of that. And Paul really did a lot of great writing himself.
So you're writing the songs, are they demoing them, or are you literally just writing the songs before you decide to do anything in the studio?
Write the songs before we do anything in the studio.
And then you got the songs, and so now what happens?
And we run through the songs, there's some rehearsal, and then we get to the point of recording. But I kept my word. We weren't going to get in the studio and start recording until we were armed with the right stuff. There was no point.
So at that point, when you're actually heading to the studio, obviously you start with Eric on drums. Mm-hmm. At that point, so where does it, well, talk about Eric, obviously, because it's the most asked question Michael gets, and he's trying to avoid it, but obviously the sound of the drums for Eric are.
So Eric was a good player. I am very sorry that he's not here. One of the things that was so marked about him was that being in Kiss was the most important thing in his life. He was somebody who Kiss was the be-all for him, and that was something that got a lot of respect. Eric had never played with a click before, as I recall. I don't think that he had. But it was an important element in the recording process that he have a click kind of very low in the headphones, so the time was always kept, and it did help him. I often did a lot of cutting, that once a track was cut, we had 3, 4, 5 takes. Maybe there was a section of one that was better than another, and I would cut it in. After everybody left, I would just clean up the tracks and kind of rearrange things and so forth. And a lot of that happened with Eric, but it was perfectly normal for those days. I'm sorry that he's gone. The drum sound itself was a big commitment that all of us made to really get something that was really powerful. Gene had a particular idea about the drums. He wanted to have the power of Zeppelin's drums, in particular John Bonham's. You can't really do that, you know. You wind up looking at Gene or anybody and say, well, I can do that, you just have to give me John Bonham. Or you have to put me in the studio that he was in, or you have to give me those particular electronics that recorded him. Because John Bonham was kind of like a percussionist who they accidentally gave a drum kit to. He was just an incredible musician and had a big variety of things that he could do with that. So I had established over the years a certain kind of technique of recording drums with Telefunken 251s, a certain kind of microphone. We went about in the studio finding the right location to put the kit, and once that was found, then you wind up having to really treat the room itself as a separate instrument, because when the drummer hits the drum, there's the sound you're recording, but then there's also the reverberation in the room, which is all part of the character that you can use or not use. So we got very involved in that, and you know, just like there isn't anything which is simple. I keep saying there's no manual for any of this stuff. You just need people that are committed to trying to get to a certain point and are willing to kind of stay up for days doing it. And that's what we did. And we came out with a drum sound that made everybody happy and made Eric feel like he could play better because he could hear himself really well. And he loved the way that he sounded because it was huge. And it brought a lot of character. I've got to say to all of you guys, you know, I'm so appreciative of you and so appreciative of how many of you have come up and talked to me about Creatures and the impact that it had, not just on Kiss's career, but on you personally. And guys like me don't have that experience. We sat in control rooms behind panes of glass and slaved over records for a number of months. We really didn't get to see the impact that it had on you. And so to get that given back on these cruises has been a very, really big thing for me, and I really thank you for that. It's been very special. One last point to that. I couldn't be more sincere. There's something, you know, there's something about you guys and Kiss that is very difficult to describe and even to define. You know, I was telling someone just a little while ago, if this was a Rolling Stones event or a Bon Jovi event, or there would still be some fandom going on, but it would never have this powerful undercurrent of feeling that exists with Kiss. And that's extraordinary. And so I feel privileged to be here and to have the opportunity. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The funny part is, Michael, when we asked him when we were doing the panel last year, and Paul Stanley asked me to put a panel together. He asked me who I'd want on my panel, pick who I would want. And Paul's very dear friends with Michael to this day, and he was my first choice. And he was very surprised that I asked. He was, I think, trying to get out of it at first, and it was his girlfriend who wanted to go on a cruise that got him on the cruise. So it's a little bit different than you thought, right?
At this point, that earns me big points because she's being talked about publicly. And,
So you get the drums down.
So we got the drums, and to talk about the drums just a little bit more, as I was talking just a little while ago. So you have a great drum sound. I mean, a phenomenal drum sound. And then it comes time to mix the drum sound, and we flew to New York, and Bob Clearmountain was the mixer. And Clearmountain had this stylistic thing that he did where he would send sometimes an instrument, in this case the sound of the drums, into the bottom of an elevator shaft. And the reverberation would climb up that shaft where there would be another microphone, tube microphone hanging here. It would take it back, and you can take that and blend it in with the drums for character. Well, it sounds easy, but what happens is you send the drum sound to the bottom of the elevator shaft, and then what? Maybe it sounds like mud. And so it takes some time to clarify that and make that into something, and then you have to be sure that the microphone that's hanging up there to collect this information is the right microphone, and does it have the right character? And so all these steps, all these different beats, nothing was so simple like, hey, let's throw it down in the elevator shaft. That sounds pretty cool. But there's a lot of technical experience that went along with it, and a lot of failure in order to reach a point of success, just like with anything else. So I always like to mention that, because people say, well, put it in an elevator shaft, that was pretty cool. Yeah, it was pretty cool, but there's a lot that goes into it, and nothing is straightforward, especially in recording.
Well, when you were working on the project, you did the drums, and then you get into obviously the bass. Was it Paul and Gene working together? Is Gene on all the bass? I had heard Eric maybe on some of the bass. Do you remember any of these things where it's more?
I remember Eric either trying a part or showing a part. It's been a long time ago. I don't remember exactly him playing the bass on a track. Michael Porcaro came and played on Creatures, and he did a great job. Unfortunately, Michael Porcaro is somebody else who's no longer with us. He was part of Toto, and he was a great guy. But a lot of people contributed. That was a point where it was a very fluid situation. Priority was the quality of the record and the feel of the record and the identity of the record. And if somebody came in, like Paul was talking about at the art show, Steve Ferris from Mr. Mister came and played wonderfully, and played within the character of what the concept of Kiss was about. And that was the main thing that Paul and Gene were very diligent about, and should have been always, but they did a great job at it, to know the perimeters of the boundaries of Kiss, and what would be within their signature, so to speak. And they were great at that.
So obviously Ace is not on much of the album, if any. He told me he doesn't think he's on anything. You think he's on a rhythm track or something?
Ace played on Killers. It's so long ago, I apologize. I don't remember which track he played on. But Creatures was filled up with other people.
And what was that process? I've never asked you this, but what was the thinking? Were they trying to get a new guitarist, or were they just trying to get someone to come in and play on that particular track?
We were trying to do the record and get the record done, and they were also in the back of their minds looking.
At the same time.
Because things with Ace had become pretty sad.
So you said Steve Ferris? Steve Ferris on Creatures of the Night, right? The main track.
And then Robin Ford played on
So what would go? You had Steve Ferris in there. You liked him obviously enough that solo is on Creatures. Why would he not have done 3 or 4 other solos? Or
because his style didn't necessarily really fit the other tracks.
And that was you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robin Ford, who's a renowned blues player, came and played the solo on "Still Love You," and did an incredible job. I mean, we sat there together, and Paul said his technique is incredible. And that's very, very true. And Robin Ford did a really great job. But Robin Ford was really outside the pod, so to speak. He was from a different world, different genre of music.
Can you remember, I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but not in detail, who else is on the album? Who other guitarists and different tracks? Is Bob Kulick, you think, was on one track? I think Danger?
Well, Kulick was on Killers, and Bob and I have a curious memory about this, because there was a track which we cut and Bob played an incredible solo. I mean, just an amazing solo. And then we went to have Paul sing the track, and Paul decided the track was a little too high, so we needed to recut the track. And Bob said, but my song, I can't repeat that solo. I'll never repeat that solo. Bob can be pretty adamant. So,
as we all know. No.
So,
it's not on the cruise. No. I had to say that.
So what we wound up doing was it was pretty extraordinary in those years, because the technology had not advanced quite this much. We actually took 2 or 3 days and we took the entire track and we tuned the whole track down in order to preserve Bob's solo within that track. And we did that, and then Paul went and sang the track, and it was great. So it was a pretty interesting time.
How about Vinny? Any idea how many songs he's actually on? I remember, I'm friends with Mark Slaughter, and we were talking about what you just said the other day, where he said, I was with Vinnie Vincent saying, oh, you played a tremendous solo, and I Still Love You, and Vinny's like, yeah, that's not me. So, it's still a good solo, but yeah. But so, is he definitely on tracks? Is he?
Vinny, I remember Vinny playing some rhythm stuff, but I don't honestly remember. Well, I should take that back, because there was a solo that Paul sang him the solo, and Vinny's playing Paul's solo. And maybe if we keep talking, it'll come back to me which one.
Yeah. So, I mean, what kind of time, what are we talking about? It seems like a longer process, this record, than Kiss normally spends on a record, or they had at least to that point.
Well, there was so much reconstruction going on, because once again, we were still fielding new material, getting new songs written. And there were 2 records kind of wrapped all together. One was Killers, which was an obligation that needed to be finished and get that record out. And then it was Creatures, and Creatures was going to be the big announcement record, the kind of the return to who we really are record. And those 2 records were very tied together. We started Killers. We never stopped working. We just worked all the way through. So how long did that take?
By the way, I mean, it's more than what Kiss had done at that time, right? I mean, it seemed that they put more effort into this album than, I don't want to take anything away from previous records, but just time frame. From talking to Ace and even Paul and Gene and things, they churn records out pretty quick. This one seemed they were more determined and spent more time, and obviously listen to someone from the outside tell them they need songwriters to come in and help them.
There was a mandate about making sure that the songs were actually of a certain quality and really made a contribution to the album. Then there was the actual recording of those songs, and then there was, like I said, it was very fluid, because it was bringing in other people at that time to make contributions that benefited the record, that was going to really, how can I put it, restore the image correctly of what the band was really about. And for sure, it's time consuming.
You mentioned a couple of times that the band knew, you kind of alluded to the fact that this was really kind of a make or break album.
It was a mission.
Yeah.
And everybody felt it, and everybody was absolutely determined. And even Eric, because Eric had everything invested in Kiss. Eric was completely determined that he was going to play the best he's ever played. And everybody did a great job. The record, the interesting thing about Creatures for me is that it's an amalgamation of different chemistries at different times that wound up producing something that wound up being very unified. It actually has an identity, it's got a personality. And so many people here come up and talk to me about it or want to say something about it because it really impacted them. And even though it may not have sold as many as Lick It Up or Animalize, the important thing is that it affected you. And it affected me and everybody. So that's the win for me. Because I always really believe that if you follow something that makes you feel good or makes you feel something, and you succeed in that way for that reason, then it really is valuable.
Do you remember how many tracks were actually recorded for the record? We talked about maybe some ending of a Wendy Williams album by chance, or when?
For sure, we recorded more tracks than wound up in the album. I couldn't tell you how many.
So some of those, we were talking like some of the tracks on Wendy Williams, It's My Life, things like that obviously sound like Creatures.
Yeah.
A lot of them could have been from those sessions.
Could have been.
And then, so who, at this point you finished the record, you guys done, what happens at that point where you actually, how do you whittle it down? How did you decide what tracks and end up on the record and what finally became the album?
Just through a process of conversation and living with it for a little bit and making a decision about it. It wasn't that complicated because.
But they were still, you were deeply involved in it, obviously. It wasn't like Gene and Paul and that's it. I mean, they obviously let you really deeply involved in the album.
Right. My role was, to mediate and also do my job, which was to oversee everything. So, sure. That's the job.
So, and again, I know we talked about different things like this. What happens, you finish a record, it's done, you pick the tracks, you talked about the mastering was very important. Matter of fact, we need to ask someone later what you brought up about the mastering, but you picked the specific, was it George?
George Massenburg at Sterling. Now I noticed on the CD that I saw a few minutes ago on Look It Up that they had gone back and remastered again. When they come out with a remastered version of a particular album, sometimes the remastering engineer views it as an opportunity for creativity. So he can change and alter things. He can add echo where there wasn't as much echo before. He can alter the EQ. Maybe the record does sound better. But if they start messing with adding echo and stuff, it changes the character of the record. And that's what Keith is talking about, yeah. So that may have happened somewhat on Look It Up, I'm not sure.
So they finish a record, you're done, you turn it in. What are they feeling? I mean, obviously talking to them, and you, since then, obviously was kind of a low point in their career. They turned the album in, they were pretty confident this is...
That Creatures was going to be something? They immediately went and did what Kiss does. They got on the road and promoted the record and went and played, and that tour was slow to kind of wake up, as I recall. But they stuck with it. They persevered. They were relentless. And that's part of who they are, and that's one of the reasons why they're great.
Yeah, I talked to Paul quite a bit about that, just from a fan standpoint, that even though the record wasn't commercially successful initially when it came out, that it absolutely saved Kiss, or it got them where a lot of our fans like me that were totally, on board with this album. It's my favorite album, but it definitely did the job without being commercially successful at the time, right?
I'd like thinking that it restored some of the identity, which was really sorely needed at that time, because a lot of people got very confused by The Elder. And Bob Ezrin, who produced that, is a very old friend of mine, and he's a brilliant producer, and that record was very ambitious, and maybe too ambitious, I don't know, but I was glad to be a part of helping restore something that really gave a cause a lot of meaning.
Well, you want to take questions, or you want to go and talk a little Lick It Up, or just focus on Creatures today? So Michael can come back next year and talk about Lick It Up. I think she'd like to come back, right? Do we have a roaming mic?
I've got one right here, and I have a question right here. Cool.
Can you say it?
You've obviously done so much and great work, by the way, and thank you for saving Kiss, or being part of saving Kiss. But yeah, this album in particular, is there one moment you look back and you say, wow, I was part of that moment? Maybe just a blip of a song, but you listen to it and you say, wow, that was really good.
I made a lot of records over the years with a lot of different kinds of people. And there's nothing better for me than to be part of a mission to fix something. I'm just one of those people, I'm kind of wired that way. And so being able to try and figure out how to best contribute to accomplishing that was a big thing. As you're talking, I'm reminded of Still Love You, which is on Creatures. And I remember when Paul sang that, he was really feeling it. I mean, it really was kind of where he was at with that moment in time. And I felt when somebody reveals themselves in that way, which is what you want to have happen with all music, that you get touched by something and you're made vulnerable by it, and then you're connected to it. And Paul really did that with that particular vocal, and yeah, I'm very proud to have played that role that I did in all of that, for sure. But it's a privilege to be connected in those moments in the studio when that happens. It doesn't always happen. But when it does, you think, yeah, this is personal for all of us. And that's a pretty great thing. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
Hey, thank you.
Sure.
Got another question for you right here.
Hello? Hello, to the left.
Which way going?
Here.
You can't see anything, just so you know.
We're
You can't see a
blinded.
thing.
We're blinded
Yeah,
by the light.
I can talk. You say you have discovered helping Kiss with this Creatures record. Have you done the same with another band later? The way you experienced it?
You mean a band that was in trouble and needed help?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, everybody wants to be successful. That's the goal. Turns out that usually to be successful, you have to not think about being successful. You have to think about doing something that moves you. So, like I said, I made a lot of records. But the records that meant the most, that maybe had a chance to get elevated success-wise, were ones where we've really focused on doing something that had a lot of feeling to it. I don't know if that's the best way to answer your question, but was I ever in a situation where somebody was really going downhill? There's an English artist that I tried to help somebody out with named Steve Harley, who was an English glam artist, which is completely outside my venue, and I was trying to help a friend with that. And his career needed some boosting. So we did a certain kind of work and cut another 5 tracks for an album and so forth. And it seemed like it helped. It didn't resurrect everything, didn't catapult him anywhere, but it helped. I know that it helped. But so many artists in the 70s and the 80s were artists that you were excited to be involved with. There was so much talent during that period of time. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's what I would say.
Fine.
Great. We have another question right to your right in the middle.
The visual impact of Kiss was always very important to the sales of their records or opinion of them in the public. Paul said as recently as today that during Creatures he was ready to remove the makeup, and that was in discussion. During the writing process, did that have any effect on how the songs were written or the direction that they were taking the lyrics even?
I don't believe that it did, and I don't remember that it had or hadn't, but I don't believe that it did, because Paul was very engrossed in trying to write the best possible songs that we could have. But it sounds like you're suggesting maybe he was trying to play to the idea that the makeup would come off, and that the songs that he was doing were going to be somehow a part of that or would help that, if I'm getting it right. And I don't think so. I think that, we all started to get excited about the music because the songs that were coming in that were being co-written, they were strong. And we got excited about the idea of making the record, but nobody was saying, gee, I don't know if we should take the makeup off this time or not. Creatures was a message to the fans, like I said. We're still here. We know how to do this. And we are who you thought we were. To me, that was the bottom line message of Creatures. And Lick It Up, when it was time for Lick It Up, there wasn't even a clear decision, as I remember, and I could be wrong, that at the beginning of Lick It Up, that it was about taking the makeup off. That option was always dangling in the air at any time they wanted to press that button. So my focus was always trying to help make the best record possible.
All right, next question.
Hey, Michael. Before you were talking about bringing outside writers to the album, I know on Bryan Adams' album he has the song "Don't Treat Me Lonely." Was that ever recorded for the Creatures of the Night album by Kiss, do you know? It was written with Eric Carr and Bryan Adams?
If I believe you, but I'm not remembering it, so I'm not going to make anything up. But as I'm sitting here thinking about it, it sounds very, very probable, very possible.
It was Don't Leave Me Lonely, I think was the name of it.
Don't Leave Me Lonely?
Don't leave me lonely.
Don't Leave Me Lonely. Yeah, very, very possible. It's a long time ago, but no excuses.
All right, guys, we got a question on stage right, all the way in the back over here.
Hi, it's actually 3 quick questions. First one, about Creatures, I remember, I'm going for memory, so if anyone else here can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember reading one of the reviews for Creatures. It was in one of the magazines. It was either, I think it was Cream, but it might have been Hit Raider, but they were actually very critical of the recording sound of it. I remember them saying, like Gene Simmons, it sounded like he was recorded over the telephone, and they were also critical about the drum sound. I don't know if you ever saw that review or anything, or if you have any comment about it. Second question is just, what are your thoughts on the I Love It Loud remix that they did for Smash's Thrash and Hits? Because obviously they dulled down the drum sound. And third quick question is, it's not Creatures related, it's just on Animalize. I think you were given a credit for drum producer for Animalize, and I've never actually seen any other type of album where there was a separate credit for drum producing, so I was just wondering, what was your actual involvement in that?
So let's walk that backwards from the last question that you asked. We did Killers, we did Creatures, we did Look It Up. Then it was time for Animalize, but I had another commitment for another project. So the only way that I could do this, because I wouldn't leave them in the lurch, and I had, by that time, had established certain protocols with the drums, which everybody was very happy with because the end result sounded great. So I said, look, I'll stay and do the drums and make sure that they're taken care of. And as long as the drum tracks are cool and well taken care of, you're going to be okay. If you can wait for me, great, I'll be back as fast as I can. If you push forward, the tracks are solid. So that's why that drum production track is there, the credit rather. That's why that's there. Now you have to backtrack with me and tell me the second question.
The Smashes and Thrashes and Hits version of I Love It Loud, where they dulled out the drum sound and everything. Any thoughts on it?
I have to be honest, I'll go back and listen, but I don't remember reacting to it. But let me go back and listen to it. You know, like I said, a long time ago. And your first question?
Oh, just about, like I had read a review for Creatures at the time that was actually very critical of the sound. Now, again, it's a music critic, so take it with a grain of salt, but yeah, they actually were very critical of the recording sound.
And that was when the album first came out?
Yeah.
I remember a couple of those, and I kind of took them as the fact that maybe it was shock value by the critics that, you know, Kiss was still around and was doing things in a way that was very Kiss-like. And you either liked that program or you didn't like the program, but they were relentless about what it was going to be. And they were proud of it. So, you know, if Cream reacted badly to it, then they did. But, you know, if I balance that review with the amount of the fact that, you know, virtually 900,000% people come to me and say Creatures is the most amazing drum sound ever. So I really stand up for that because we worked hard to accomplish it, and it's sent a message, and that message got through. So
isn't that kind of the MO for Kiss? I mean, the records, maybe one or two the critics like, but our favorite records the critics don't like. I mean, that's par for the course with Kiss. In general, with anybody, right?
Yeah, no, I think with anybody, but in particular with Creatures, this issue of the drum sound was, you know, is very specific. mean, it's a very specific sound. It's an unforgettable component of the record, which is Eric Carr's personality as well. And like I said, I stand up for it, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you for acknowledging that.
Julie, remember Julie?
Yeah, no, we talked about it.
Michael, thanks for being here again and sharing your memories from so long ago. Obviously, it's 36 years. But you mentioned Monte Carlo a few minutes ago from Toto.
I'm wondering if you remember any other connections with Toto and maybe some of the drumming, what went into Eric's drum kits. Do you remember Shep Lonsdale?
Shep Lonsdale, who's a drummer himself, and Ron Grinnell were two drummers who served as drum tuners for me in the Creature sessions. So as part of my MO with taking care of Eric, I always had these two guys in the control room with me, and they were listening for the tuning of Eric's drums. And if something slipped or went a little bit out of tune, and drum tuners can hear drums in ways that nobody else can, I'd stop everything, they'd go out there, they'd retune, they'd come back in, we'd check it, and we'd continue, but only when they were happy, because they really, really knew. And yeah, Shep Lonsdale is a wonderful guy. I haven't talked to him for years, but really wonderful guy. Yeah, of course.
All right, next question, House Right.
Okay, I have two questions. First, it's no secret that Kiss has always used the current, I guess you would call it sound in music, as blueprints for some of the records. For instance, Crazy Night is heavily based on what's going on at the time with Heart and Foreigner, Carnival of Souls, but taking into consideration the sound of the 90s, example, Alice in Chains. The Creatures of the Night being like this comeback, heavier record for Kiss, had any albums that were, influential at the time as a blueprint for the sound of Creatures of the Night, sound and music production. And my second question is, if you would produce Kiss today, what would you do differently, or what would you contribute to Kiss now?
Sounds like, from what you're saying, was there a blueprint that I leaned upon to kind of help create this drum sound for Creatures? And if I...
Or not just the drum sound, the whole production of the record. If there was a certain sound, a certain band that was influential at the time, like in the mid-'80s, Heart and Foreigner was for Crazy Nights. Alice in Chains was sort of, to pick up a band, for Carnival of Souls. There's an undeniable kind of sound of the time influence in certain records Kiss made. So I was wondering if when Kiss went on the studio to record Creatures of the Night, if there was any consideration of any of the bands that was, I guess, popular at the time to design the sound and production of the record. That's my question.
At the time of Creatures, the answer is no, because Creatures, from my point of view anyway, because Creatures was just wrought from bare elements that we put together and kept putting together. And once other songwriters were brought in and accepted or rejected, or the work was great or needed to be changed or whatever it was, there was no model for us. And it was, the important goal was we knew that it had to have an attitude. That was the most important thing, because the biggest goal was to make sure that we were reconnected with the fans. And that seemed to have gotten really well accomplished. But there was nothing to lean on. I mean, the Foreigner records were great records, but they had nothing to do with Kiss. But they were brilliant records. Mutt Lange is a brilliant producer. So no, I can't, and I would be honest about it, believe me. I'm not shy about that. But there was nothing there was no other frame of reference. We were creating a frame of reference that we had. And the frame of reference was, how do we be Kiss in a really smart, classy, powerful way that we restate ourselves? That was the model. And even to this day, looking back as you're talking, I can't think of anybody that we could have modeled in the same way to try and accomplish that. And I'm sorry, the other question that you have?
Oh, the other question is, if you would produce Kiss today, what would you do? Do you have any specific ideas that would you like to introduce to Kiss music as a producer?
You know, whatever Kiss decides to do in the future, if they decide to do anything at all, to me, at this point, it should be a celebration of everything that they've accomplished and a celebration for all of you. And whether that's a couple new tracks or I don't know that it would be an entire album. I really don't know. I just know that the main thing is, you know, Kiss is very clearly defined now. So if there's a paradigm that could be followed or should be followed, it's there. But it's an interesting thought, for sure. Thank you.
Great, I have a question in the middle over here.
Hi, pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for taking my question. My question is about, is actually for you personally. Now that we've reached and exceeded the analog sunset and we're dealing with digital equipment, how has your process changed when you approach a project like that? And you know, if you can maybe just elaborate on that.
I have, I'm kind of one of these older archetypes where I love analog. There's a big difference between analog and digital, like we were talking a little bit ago. You know, a digital signal comes into a box, gets broken into 48,000 pieces, gets reassembled, comes out of that box, and then you have a digital signal. Digital is like fluorescence. People who work in factories with fluorescent lighting get more exhausted more easily. There's people who physically have a very hard time hearing CDs because it messes with their biorhythm. They ran a series of tests at one point where they would put a digital watch on somebody and try and restrain their arm and have them lift their arm. And they found that when the digital watch was on, they had less strength. When they took the digital watch off, all the strength returned and they could do that. So it's not because of that I'm anti-digital, I'm not. But I love the size and the warmth and the sound of analog. And you know, there's something, I often think this, we listen to music with our bodies, then we think about what's happening with our brains. But we don't hear music with our brains first. Go, yeah, that's a really interesting thing. You're either moving to the music or you're not moving to the music, and if the music is making you move, something's doing that. And because it's a very primal experience, when it sounds great and feels great, you feel whole, you feel wonderful.
So have you changed your approach to what you do since the digital age?
I still am a huge believer in tube microphones. They're old, they're rare, they're expensive. I am a big believer that they capture a signal that other things don't capture. They capture a sound and they also capture the ambience around that particular sound. You know, it's kind of like, I think I was saying earlier, you record a drum kit in a room like we did on Creatures, and you find the right place in the room to put the drums, and those drums emanate a signal coming from them, but the room itself is another instrument. This space that the drums are in, if you want, you can record that room and how that room's responding to what's happening, and then you have a sound. And that's what happened on Creatures, is that we worked to actually use all these different elements and respect all of them to create that. So I miss the analog warmth in music today. And I miss being physically moved by a lot of music, and a lot of it is great. And a lot of it, frankly, I don't get, but that's just me. But I appreciate your asking. I know what you mean. And, you know, it's the same thing with Pro Tools and with Auto-Tune, like we were talking about. Without Pro Tools and without Auto-Tune, you hear somebody singing a song, and there's a transition from a verse into a chorus, and they have to stretch their voice to hit that next note. And you're a human being, and so you feel that stretch into the next note, and it makes you feel something. And I miss that, because now, if they get too involved in their mixing, they can simply hit that auto-tune, but you'll never hear that transition. So you're robbed of feeling that human part of that vocal, and that's a big difference. You know?
Ladies and gentlemen, we have Bruce Kulick in the house.
I didn't know I was getting an introduction for a question because I'm a fan, like you guys, of music and Kiss albums and people who are creative, like Michael James Jackson, okay? And before I ask him a question that I had...
that I can't answer.
No, you can answer this one. Only you could answer this one, actually. I honestly, I regret that I didn't have the opportunity to work with you in the studio.
Me too.
During my era, okay? But I was always aware of, you know, your contribution, and especially the Creatures of the Night album I was a really big fan of. And I wasn't really always aware of the guest guitarist. I heard someone earlier asked about certain tracks and all. So the question isn't about that, but it's related to that. You put together a cohesive album, okay, for Kiss, with that powerful sound and great songs and performances, and all the lead playing shined on it, okay, yet there was that very cohesive nature of the album. And to have various players from all different, you know, Robin Ford is not your typical lead player for a Kiss album, and yet it fit, and it was the blueprint for me to imitate for a Live 3 when we used to do it live, and of course that became a recording that I'm able to enjoy and make my own. But still, from that to Creatures of the Night, which we used to do live, also opened up a Live 3. So very, very interesting, varied guitarists who I looked up later on.
Sure.
But there's still that they're all cohesive as if it was, you know, one amazing Kiss guitarist. So how did you create that? Because you needed to drive the ship, you know.
Created in the sense of being able to have all that be homogenous? Is that what
Yes, that it isn't like, who's that guy? You know, nothing stood out awkwardly, okay? It was all just tasty guitar playing, and yet, to me, there was a thread throughout the record that it all fit.
Okay, so forgive me if this sounds a little pretentious, because I would hate that if it does, but there's a difference between certain players play on top of a song, and they play the part, and they play the notes, and they're in the groove, and you don't really particularly feel anything from it. Other players feel like they play from inside the song out. And when that's happening, they're an integral part of the song. So you're very astute, of course, and you're right. All those tracks in Creatures have a lot of very different, almost culturally different guitar solos, but they were all, to me, inside the song. And so they served the song. And by serving the song, the whole album was more homogeneous in a way. It's a weird word to use for an album, but it was a consistent personality. Even Robin Ford was so off the wall, you know, this incredibly famous blues player. What's he doing with Kiss? He thought it was kind of insane that he was playing on Kiss, but you know something? He loved it because it was so outside of his normal field. And it was such a great experience for him to meet these guys who were iconic guys, and he really loved it. Stephen Ferris was Mr. What he played he played to the song more than the idea that he had to play to Kiss. So I think that if I had an answer, which I'm not sure that I do, but if I had an answer, it would be that stylistically these things fit the groove of the song, and therefore they were not invisible, but they were well hewn within it. Yeah. And that's what I would say.
Makes sense. Yep.
Give it up one more time for Bruce Kulick, everybody.
All right, guys, I have a question over to your right now.
How much Gene and Paul are different in terms of writing and regarding a song?
Where are we?
Here.
Over right, the aisle way over here.
The lights are so bright. I'm sorry. It's
You're okay.
It's because of Keith. He needs these bright lights.
I don't want to see anybody. I don't like you up here.
Okay, so my question is, how much different Gene and Paul are different from each other in terms of writing and regarding a song?
Let's say light and day as many times as we can.
And that goes for everything, though.
Yeah. But you know, and they are like light and day. But in those years that we were working together, they complemented each other in ways that you wouldn't have suspected. And it may have even been small comments, not big comments like, hey, the chorus sucks or whatever it is, but it may have been small comments that actually caused one or the other to actually rethink something he had done. And this happened all the time. It's like a family. You know, I sometimes, there's this quote from Tolstoy, and the quote is, all families are happy for the same reason, but each family is unhappy for reasons of its own. And that's kind of like Gene and Paul. They kind of are perfectly meshed, and at the same time there's some edges that press in the wrong places. So were very wonderful at correcting each other and contributing to what the other guy was doing. Absolutely.
All right, we have time for one more question right here.
How you doing, sir?
Good, thank you.
Question is, I do music as well, and when you're dealing with certain artists, some of them, you know, they work hard, some of them work ethic is not good. What is some of your advice to like push the artist as being a producer at the same time?
When you say push, how do you mean to try and get them to write more material?
Write material, record material, you know the whole 9 yards.
It's a challenge. You know, I mean, I was doing a record with a woman at one point who was a really good singer, but she was singing a really good song that we had agreed on, and I didn't believe a word she was saying. So she came in the control room and said, "What do you think?" I said, I got to tell you, I don't believe you. And if I don't believe you, then I can't help you. And so we figured out some crazy lopsided way that she would get re-inspired, and she eventually did. And she did a vocal, and the vocal came out great. But those are the moments where something goes upside down, and you can't easily figure out how do you get past this problem? How do you get the person to perform better? How do you persuade them that the song they're singing is actually not that great a song, and maybe we should go in a different direction? How do you tell a musician who thinks that he's really hot shit that what he just played is not so great? It's kind of like grin and bear it, you know. I'm sure I've got a lot of scars from those conversations, but it's part of the job. I don't know to pretend that I can advise you on it. I just think you have to have great stamina, and you have to have in mind what you really believe is right and what will really help the project and help the artist. And you can't ever let go of that. Your point of view can be improved on, but at the core, you have to have a feeling for what it is, and believe in yourself. There's one last thing I would say that, and I said this at the last Kiss Kruise when we did the thing on stage, and that is that I have this idea that there's a conceit that we all operate on, and that conceit is if it moves me, then it's going to move Keith, and it's going to move Kathy, and it's going to move Sony, and but it has to, if you're the producer, you have to honestly believe that you're being affected by something means something. And if that happens, then I think you're going in the right direction. But if it's not happening, then I think you got to take a pause and think about what it would take that would make you feel something good.
So obviously we're going to wrap it up, but I want to thank you, Michael. I've told you this many times, and I know talking to a lot of friends and fans that album was so important to so many people and so important in history. And I know you didn't really know that before the last cruise and people talking to you, but I 100% can tell you I would not be here if Creatures of the Night didn't come out. I would not be in the cruise, or at least working for Kiss. There's no doubt. That record was so important, and I thank you so much for your part. And I know you said that Gene and Paul would have persevered. You said that that's their nature, but you also told me that album was a real teamwork effort with all of you, and I never forget that, because that seems to the albums that I like all Kiss records, but there's obviously albums that weren't as much teamwork as that.
We took up the cause, and there was a cause, and it was a mission, and nothing was going to stand in the way of trying to figure out the best solution we could to address that. And it's a pretty great thing to be involved in. So.
Thank you.